Welcome to the World of Eora, a news and lore podcast about Pillars of Eternity and Avowed. I'm your host, Eric, aka Gingerino. Thank you so much for joining me as we dive into the history, lore, and game mechanics for the worlds that Obsidian has created for us. Hello everybody, and welcome to another episode of the World of Eora. I'm your host, Eric, aka Gingerino. Thanks everyone for joining me on another episode as we dive into the history, lore, and game mechanics for Pillars of Eternity 1 and 2 and Avowed. For those wondering why we pair all those games together, it's because they share the same fantasy setting known as Eora. And so the hope in this show is to dive into the lore of the world and the writing of the world, understand the stories and the way it operates, and just get a better, more nuanced appreciation for the world that we play these games in. Maybe give you some inspiration for some replays, maybe just help you to develop a world that you can play Dungeons and Dragons in. Whatever it is that you're particularly into, that's what this show is for. If you're new to the show, welcome to the show. Really happy to have you here. I'll signpost you to episode 0 if you want to get some more signposting, I guess, towards other episodes that might be a little bit more foundational if you're brand new to this world. But this will be, I guess, an okay episode to start off with. It's not going to be incredibly spoilery, especially for Avowed, but we do talk about some late game stuff or maybe high concept stuff from Pillars of Eternity 2 Deadfire. So maybe some spoilers for the second Pillars of Eternity game. Nothing mainline narrative-wise, but definitely some interesting lore that you can discover on your own that maybe that's what you want to do. But if you're not worried about having spoilers of the main narrative of Pillars of Eternity 2, then this shouldn't be a problem for you. Today we're going to be discussing the books The History of the Living Lands, parts 1 through 5. And if you've played in the early areas of Dawntreader for Avowed, and you've especially done the Dawnbreaker side quest, you should be familiar with these books. There's something you can pick up along the way, and there's actually an achievement tied to it, the achievement of Historian, for collecting all 5 of these books. Now, when you read these books, especially in tandem with some lore that we have from Pillars of Eternity 2 Deadfire, then we get to see an interesting picture about what it is that these books are talking about. And granted, a lot of the lore in these books kind of gets expanded upon later in Avowed, and so maybe it's not as big of a revelation that I'm going to make it sound like on today's episode, but I'm going to try to ignore any later parts of Avowed and just talk about these books as if you had just gotten them and you know some of the lore from Pillars of Eternity 2. So that's what I'm going to be moving forward with. But yeah, that's what we're going to be talking about today. This has to do with the history of the Living Lands, who the people of the Godless are, what their origins may be, and how that ties in to an interesting group of people that you can see in Pillars of Eternity 2. I'm not really doing much on news anymore on this podcast just lately because I haven't been very consistent in releasing episodes. Again, thank you for your patience on that, by the way. I'm just transitioning to a new job and a new daily routine, and so getting that kind of a thing going has been difficult. And we're also entering into the busy season, both in terms of work and personal life. And, I also want to take time with the family. So I thank you for your patience on that and your communications on that. But thankfully, this will be coming out a week after last episode, so I'm getting on track, baby. But yeah, as far as news goes, the only thing that I think is worth noting is that they are supposed to have a roadmap for post-release content or support for Avowed. So it sounds like Avowed is going to get some pretty significant updates, possibly expansions, maybe some more side quests. They're adding some new skills or something, apparently. So there's a bunch that will be coming to Avowed, and later this upcoming week, they're supposed to, at least that's what I've heard, have a roadmap out. So keep your eyes out for news about future content for Avowed that we can discuss on this show, especially if it ends up bringing anything else more lore-related going on. I know I, among many others, are hoping for DLC, but we'll see what happens. But with that all said, let's jump into today's lore.
Half the locals would arrest you for trespassing and the rest would kill you outright. I'm curious, what exactly did you find there?
So to discuss today's lore, I gotta give some credit to some people on the internet for making this even possible, because while I played Avowed and I took screenshots of everything I absolutely could, organizing screenshots into folders and timestamps and topics is just way too time consuming. But I've done what little work that I can. However, there have been a lot of work by people online to already organize a lot of this stuff, and I'm particularly using mapgenie.io and their interactive map of the living lands, where you can zoom in on an area and you can see where various pieces of items are, you can see where certain quests are given, and there's just a lot to see there. And so I'm using that map to actually look at and view 4 out of the 5 books, and then I'm using my screenshot for one last one. As well, pillsofeternity.fandom.com have been very good at transcribing a lot of the lore, not just from Pillars of Eternity 1 and 2, but also Avowed. There's also a lot on Fextra Life, but personally I've been finding a lot of success with fandom, but I've also been on that site a lot longer, so that's fair. So we're going to be going through these books one at a time, and then I'm going to try to tie that back in with some lore that we see from the Deadfire game. So we're going to read these, not in the order that you would pick them up in, but we're going to read these in order that these books would have been written in the game world. We start off with Part 1, A History of the Living Lands, Part 1, Origin. And this is what the lore says. The living lands do not exist. But certainly there is an island. Certainly there are valleys. There are rivers, lakes, and mountains. There are trees and fungi in abundance. Taken together, do these not constitute the living lands? I will concede that they constitute the description of a continent, that this continent lies north of the equator, and that this continent is equidistant from Aedir and Rauatai. I will concede that this continent is real so long as you and I walk upon it. We call this island the Living Lands, but the Living Lands, in quotes, is merely a descriptor of its attributes. The list of attributes does not alone make up a place. I believe that for a place to become real, it must have a name. For a name to be real, it must have a history. History confers meaning, and meaning is given to a name by its namer. But the Living Lands cannot be this island's name because I have traveled its breadth, climbed its peaks, and delved its countless depths, and I have discovered that the Living Lands has no namer at all. Unless the words we use to describe this continent, the Living Lands, were given to us by the Godless, unless the words have meaning only they could comprehend, and unless these words have a history that only they could know, and the haxaity, the thisness of this place, was lost with them. Okay, so let's strap in. Let's quickly analyze what it is we just read. First thing, it says the Living Lands does not exist, which then the author of this opening to this series then kind of elaborates on this idea that the Living Lands doesn't exist, not in the sense that the continent doesn't exist, but the name of the Living Lands doesn't really exist. There's no reason that it should exist. In particular, because they can't find an origin for the name. Like, everyone calls it the Living Lands, but no one is taking credit for calling it that. That's just what everyone has been calling it. So where did this name come from? That's kind of the whole opening section of this book, is that there's already a lot of mystery and secrecy with the Living Lands in its own etymology, like the name of the origin of where the name even comes from. Could it be the Godless, the people that were here in an ancient civilization? Could they have called it the Living Lands, and that name has just perpetuated through, civilizations upon civilizations to the modern times? Is it true? Is it not true? If we will never know, because that secret would have died with them. So that's an interesting idea of, like, where did the name the Living Lands come from? Now, I don't know if I necessarily agree with what this person is saying. It's like, it very well could have come from somewhere, and we just don't have the, manuscripts to show it, right? So a lot of it could have been word of mouth, too. So who knows where it originally started? But, the lore that this part of the game is trying to put forward is that there's no known origin for the name of the Living Lands. Not something that can be proven, but interesting enough. One piece of interesting lore here is that the Living Lands, the continent, this island that we play the game in, is equidistant from Aedir and Rauatai, which are two other continents and nations named after those continents, or I guess vice versa, that exist within the world of Eora. Aedir is the place where your player character comes from. Rauatai is another empire, and that's actually the place that your companion Kai originally hails from. So interesting little bit of lore there. But yeah, definitely starting off on a strong note with the Living Lands. The name has no origin, or at least we don't know who the namer is. And just in case anyone's wondering, I did not know what Haxiety meant. I actually had to look it up. I don't even know if I'm pronouncing it right. It means the property of being a unique and individual thing. The next entry in this series is A History of the Living Lands Part 2, Lacuna, which means an unfilled space or interval, a gap. And it reads, what are we to make of the absence of the Ingwithans from the Living Lands? I think often of the hundreds of years I spent in the Eastern Reach. In all my time, there never once were the ruins of the Ingwith out of my sight. A trio of their standing stones loomed from peak of a nearby hill through my bedroom window, and the long shadows of their machines fell every day over my church. The roads we trod on were their roads, and the walls that divided up our lands were their walls. Their temples became our markers, our fields were littered with their tools. No mountain nor river nor forest could stop their building, and with their technology they mastered the world. The Ingwithans laid the foundation of Eora. We, the living, are merely skin atop their bones. But they never made it to the Living Lands. How can that be so? So this second entry raises a really interesting point, and I'll have to explain some stuff here for people who are a little more unfamiliar. The Ingwithans are, like the Godless and Avowed, an ancient civilization that we learn about from Pillars of Eternity 1 and 2. They were a thriving race that seemed to have spanned across the entire globe. They had developed advanced technologies. They had a thriving civilization and political ties. They were the worldwide superpower in the ancient past of this world. And they are gone now. And when you're playing Pillars of Eternity 1 and 2, I'm not going to spoil anything because you do learn stuff about them when you're playing Pillars of Eternity 1 and 2, especially the first game. And I'm not going to dive into those because if you want to play that game, I want you to discover it for yourself. But like, we learned some stuff about them in playing that game. But the big question is like, what happened to them? Where did they go? Like this massive civilization, and they're thriving successfully across the globe, and then they're just gone. And the ruins of their society are the only thing left standing. And the story of what happens to him is very interesting, which again, you play the first Pillars game if you really want to know about it, or you can listen to my episode about the Ingwithans if you really want to learn some stuff about them, but be warned, major spoilers, like just all of the spoilers really, for that episode if that's what you want to listen to. But the question raised in this document here is, okay, we have the Ingwithans, and they've spanned across the globe, and not only are they expansive, but they're technologically advanced. And not only are they technologically advanced, their stuff is literally everywhere. Like, you can see ruins dotting the landscape wherever you go, especially in a continent called the Eastern Reach, which is the one they reference in this document. It's as if the Ingwithans are everywhere, and densely everywhere, but for some reason, they never got to the Living Land. You know, they traversed the entirety of the Eastern Reach. They established deep roots in the Deadfire archipelago. They went all over the globe, or, supposedly. I haven't heard about certain places within the world, but they went all over the place, yet somehow they didn't make it to the Living Lands. Why is that? How can that be so? And now the title of this book makes sense. Lacuna, a void or a gap that needs to be filled. And it really does raise an interesting question. Why weren't they able to go there? Now, I have some theories myself that ties into some lore that we learn about from Pillars of Eternity 2, Deadfire, but I'm not going to bring that up right now. I'll bring that up in a little bit when we get to something called the Clay Tablet. But let's read on to part 3. Glossolalia. I don't know if I'm saying that word right. Oh, apparently it is a real word. The phenomenon of apparently speaking in an unknown language, especially in religious worship. It is practiced especially by Pentecostal and charismatic Christians. So the phenomenon of apparently speaking in an unknown language. I think that in church terms is the speaking in tongues is what that is. So this is part 3 called Glossolalia. I don't even know if I'm pronouncing it right, but here we go. In the ruins of Ukaizo, the great city of the ancient Huana in the Deadfire, I once found a curious inscription. The inscription was written in 3 languages and arranged in a circle around a small pool of water. 2 of the languages were unknown to me. The first of these scripts was largely runic, rounded and orderly. It looked like it was meant to be painted rather than chiseled into stone. it put me to mind of the architecture of Engwith, with its frequent arches and odd conjunctions of angles. The other language branched off one long stem. This one was curious. At first, I thought it was meant to read left to right, but the characters' shapes didn't have a flow that felt intentional. It wasn't until I tilted my head and I understood that I was attempting to read it on its side that it was meant to be read from top to bottom and likely right to left. Fascinating. I have seen nothing like it in all of Eora. The third of the scripts I recognized. It was Near Ancient Huana, a language I'd studied idly in my youth. I had been obsessed with its more logographic predecessor, Far Ancient Huana, for many years. What a pleasure at last to see something I knew. After a few hours of meditation, I recall enough of the alphabet to take a stab at the transcription. Ka Wingaro Owatari Tekatawa Niki Panua Kaizo Nakingi On Kingi. And it goes on. I'm not gonna do a fake language here for you. Not to, discredit or anything like that. I just cannot do it justice. Anyway, so you have a statement here in this ancient Huana script, and it is translated as Wingaro Owatari, King of Ukaizo, the King of Kings. It has the cadence of a dedication. Could this last inscription be the key to deciphering the other two unknown languages? So this is where we're going to start getting introduced to some of the spoilers that I mentioned that we can find in Pillars of Eternity 2 Deadfire. So if you're still unsure and you haven't made a decision yet, now is going to be the time to jump off the episode, because this is where we're going to start getting into that a little bit. So it starts off with reading, in the ruins of Ukaizo, the great city of the ancient Huana in the Deadfire, I found this curious inscription. So Ukaizo is a very important city, and it's kind of one of the focal points of Pillars of Eternity 2 Deadfire. This is a great city that is associated with the ancient Huana. The Huana are the people group that you primarily engage with in the Deadfire. They're one of the major factions. They're the people living in the Deadfire archipelago, which is a different region in this world entirely. And they have long ancient ties to early history of this world, or at least these early civilizations like the Engwithans and Ukaizo, and the Huana, etc., etc. And this inscription is written in what is written, say here is 3 languages. So there's this inscription in Ukaizo, and he recognizes one as ancient Huana, something that this person has studied for a very long time. The other one that they sort of recognize looks Engwithan. So he categorizes, or she, I don't actually know, sorry. They categorize the 2 languages. One is Huana for sure. The other one as very likely Engwithan. And then the third one that they don't recognize and actually seems to be written in a script that is written vertically and read right to left rather than left to right. What this implies is that during the time of the Engwithans, which again, this is like a high point in these ancient civilizations in terms of global expansion and technological power, etc., there were these 3 major superpowers. There is Ukaizo, or the ancient Huana, and there are the Engwithans, and then this third one. And it's because of this third entity that I think it answers the question to the previous book of why were there no Engwithans on the living lands? And I'll get to that in a little bit. But to continue on through these books, we're going to read A History of the Living Lands Part 4, Redacted. That's literally what it's called. It just says Redacted. And this is going to be an interesting one to kind of walk through. There are 2 different types of fonts in this book. There is very clearly the text that the book was originally supposed to be written in. And then there are these italicized sections that are describing what you are seeing. So it starts off by saying, every page of this book has been painted black, except for the very last, which features a large drawing of an unusually ornate key and a note written on the runes of an unknown language. Beneath then someone has scribbled, "How do their agents keep finding my work? They've already defaced 3 versions of this volume alone. I don't know what they find so objectionable about my theories on the meaning of the Godless language, but I'm done rewriting it. You bastards win, no more." The notes above have been amended by more measured hand, likely sometime after the first note was written. I've compared my notes regarding the inscription from Ukaizo with the script from the intact clay tablet in my lab and realized they share several shapes in common. I may be able to make some headway in translating this if I can find an expert in the Godless. Another amendment follows, but that too has been mostly blacked out. Near the end of the redaction, the paint suddenly runs off the edge of the page, and a splash of blood stains the margins. All you can make out is a pair of shaky sentences circled several times. Yiz. Could that mean God? Okay, let's walk through this one. This one is one of the most interesting out of the entire 5. So what is likely going on here is this person who's authoring this series of books, they're doing a deep dive on the languages of these people groups that they talked about in the previous book. We had the ancient Huana, the Ingwithans, and this third unknown ones, and they're comparing it with this clay tablet they found of what I'm guessing is Godless script. And apparently, this person who's authoring this, they are seeing a connection between the Godless language and the language of this third entity that we see from the ancient times, this ancient script that was seen at Ukaizo. And in this 4th volume of this series, they were obviously writing about this theory, but there is a group of people that are getting a hold of the copies of these books and they are redacting them. Now, that might sound a little weird, but to those who are very familiar with the lore, you're actually already familiar with who did this. This is very likely the work of a group called the Hand Occult. The Hand Occult, I've done an episode on them, check them out if you want, is a group of people. They largely follow the god Wal, god of dreams, secrets, mysteries, and revelations, my favorite of the deities, if I might add. The Hand Occult are largely librarians, would be a really short way of describing them, but they like to control the flow of esoteric knowledge throughout the world of Eora. So if there is any books or scrolls or documents or what have you out there that talk about anything important to the world of Eora, whether it's its metaphysics, whether it's its biology, whatever it is, they like to control the flow of that knowledge of what gets diffused or suffused throughout society as common knowledge and what gets withheld as secrets, things that the general public would not know, very esoteric or enigmatic lore of the world. So these people will often find books like this and they will edit them or redact them entirely before redistributing them or hiding them altogether. And so it seems that the Hand Occult have found some sort of very esoteric knowledge in this volume of the book that this author has been writing, and they have been redacting it entirely. So there's information here that they don't want getting out. Now, in case that sounds nefarious, like, ooh, it must be a really big secret, that's not necessarily true, because they do follow the god Wal, who is just a complete enigma anyways in the first place. They could have completely dumb reasons for wanting to hide certain facts about the world, but quite often it is really big stuff, so it is possible, but we can't conclude that for sure. But that being said, there's enough here to really hint at there's a connection between the Godless, the people who have been living on the living lands in ancient societies ago, and this other third ancient society that was alongside the Huana and Ingwithans. And they specifically reference a clay tablet that they keep in their lab. And you can actually pick up this clay tablet if you're exploring enough. It's in the underwater section of the Dawntreader quest when you are in the Aethasian Temple map in the Dawnshore area. If you're in that underwater section, there you can actually pick up this clay tablet that they are referencing in this volume. And before we talk about that clay tablet in particular, let's just finish off these 5 books, and then we're going to take a look at what this might mean. The last volume in this series is A History of the Living Lands Part 5, Synthesis, brackets, work in progress. And so this is not a finished book. This is just a series of point notes, and I couldn't actually find an image of this online, so I had to use one of my screenshots, but unfortunately this is when I had some issues with screenshot saving, so I have, I think, all the important stuff at this point in time. So let's read through a lot of this. It says, in point form, 2 cultures met with ancient Huana at Ukaizo. To dedicate the city, Ukaizo is littered with Ingwithan architecture, indisputable. Therefore, Ingwithans were in Ukaizo, but for what purpose? If true, one of mystery inscriptions likely in Ingwithan language. First discovery of its kind? Other mysterious language in inscription resembles the language on clay tablet in lab. Further examination required. Clay tablet in lab was found in Godless ruin. Can assume for now Godless wrote it. Ergo, Godless were at Ukaizo? Why? If true, Engwithans knew of Godless, presuming inscriptions at Ukaizo were written at the same time. Engwithans never visited the Living Lands, as far as known. Thus, Godless forged agreement with Engwithans to keep them out of Living Lands? That can't be right. And so that's everything there's there. Sorry, that was weird to read, so it's probably weird to hear, but those were all the point forms. Essentially, this is a synthesis, so it takes all the information we've been reading and concluding thus far, and it puts it into these points. And I drew the same conclusions just reading the first 4 parts. It seems like the ancient Huwana and the Engwithans were all at Ukaizo at one point in time, and there was this third ancient society, and this author is concluding that this third ancient society is actually the same society that the Godless are. And so the Godless were also at Ukaizo for some reason. For what reason? Not necessarily sure. This person's kind of theorizing maybe they were dedicating the city, but who knows? And so why the Engwithans were never in the Living Lands is because the Godless, or the Society of the Godless, for whatever reason, must have brokered an agreement with the Engwithans to not go to the Living Lands. Or perhaps that was their homelands, right? And so they would be like, hey, we don't want you to come here or invade us. Like, this is our land, you stay away, right? Like, maybe there could have been some threat of war or something like that. That's another kind of conclusion that I think this person could have reached. And that's kind of what this person is getting at. And if you've played Pillars of Eternity 2 Deadfire, and especially Pillars of Eternity 1 to learn more about the Engwithans, I think we can very easily conclude who the Godless are here in the opening region of Avowed. To return to the clay tablet that we're referring to before that is in this person's lab. Now, this is something you can find, again, in the lab, and when you read the item description, it reads, "This clay tablet is inscribed with a flowing vertical script in a language you've never seen before." And then it reads in a fantasy language, Yul Yahiza Yezuza Lu Yaduz Regata Mi blah blah blah. I can't do it. But anyways, there is a word in here that says Inwithin, which I think means Engwithin. And so it's basically just describing a clay tablet with some fantasy language written on it. But interestingly enough, it's noted as a flowing vertical script, which is very similar to the script that you were talking about that they saw at Ukaizo. But it gets more interesting, because if you have played Pillars of Eternity 2 Deadfire, there is an item that you can get called Strange Tablet. And on this Strange Tablet, most of it is written in a weird fantasy language. The fantasy language reads as Kalaki ba Alicia Sukyuyi Sigu Nimun Sukalaki Sukiki blah blah blah. I can't do it. And then I just got through the first sentence. There's a lot of that goes on. But the opening section of the lore for Strange Tablet reads, "This stone tablet is wrapped in a rich leather and engraved in a flowing vertical script in a language you've never seen before." And so the comparison there is very stark. Like, it's written in the lore, flowing vertical script. And so I think, again, since this was a game developed by people to write the lore like that, to write the item description in that same way with a flowing vertical script, I think they're very clearly connected. And as you play through Pillars of Eternity 2, you discover that this Strange Tablet is written in a language called Seki, which is the native language of a country called Yezuha, or a continent or a society called Yezuha. It can be translated by one of your sidekicks in the second game called Reke, and it turns out to actually just be a contract for a sale of a horse or something like that. But anyways, it's very fun. You should read the actual translation. It's a good time. But yeah, so this tablet is actually written in this language of a native in the native language of the Yezuhans, the Yezuha being the country that they are from. Yezuha is a country that has been lost, not to time, I guess, but has been lost from the rest of the world because they've been separated through these giant oceanic storms known as Andra's Mortar. At one point in time, before Avowed came out, there was this really big storm that was covering a giant, massive part of the entire globe, and it was unable to be penetrated by even the best of sailors or navy or what have you. And as it turns out, again, this is where the spoilers are coming in, so you probably should have jumped off by now. And it turns out that there is another country in there. There's another nation or society in there called Yezuha. And they, as it turns out, are one of 3 major superpowers that existed in the ancient history of this world. We have the Ingwithans, we have the ancient Huani? We have the ancient Huana, and we have Yezuha. And so Yezuha is actually a relatively new idea and concept in the Pillars of Eternity world that is Eora. Granted, Pillars of Eternity came out 2018 and whatnot, so it's been around for several years, but for a lot of us who played Pillars of Eternity and the DLCs and we got to look into this lore, Yezuha was a new thing and also very mysterious and enigmatic. We didn't have a lot to go off of. We knew that they were this society of people on the other side of Andra's Mortar that we couldn't get to, but then by the end of the game, access is kind of granted. I'm just going to leave it at that in case you want to play the game, but I'm not going to tell you how or why or whatever. But they are now within reach, and so this entire society, and you learn about through the DLCs of Deadfire that they were very instrumental within the world. They were one of the global superpowers of the world. And because of that, connecting Yezuha with the Godless, we can actually make the conclusion that the people that were on the Living Lands, the Godless, they were actually people from the nation of Yezuha. I think that's a fairly rational conclusion to make. And because the Yezuhans were able to, go to Okaizo to spend time with the ancient Huana and the Ingwithans, at one time, that means that Andra's Mortar, this giant oceanic storm, at one point was not there. There was an event or something that must have caused that to come into existence, thus separating Yezuha from the rest of the known world. But there was a large amount of people from Yezuha that were at the Living Lands. Why they were there? That's not what we're talking about in today's episode, but it seems like that's why they were there. And there is one more piece of lore that explains one question that this author had about, well, why weren't the Ingwithans on the Living Lands? And to that we go to the History of Eora, Volume 7, The Three-Body Agreement, which reads, the representatives of 2 great empires met in the seat of the third, and Engwith, Yezuha, and Ukaizo agreed upon an exchange. For land and power, Ukaizo would give Engwith a home for their research. For able soldiers, Yezuha would allow Engwith to spread their faith. So it was that Ukaizo conquered the Deadfire, the Yezuhans conquered Yishe, and Engwith made willing conspirators of them all. And the reason I think this is important is because it says Yezuha would allow Engwith to spread their faith. That to me implies some level that Yezuha had a military standing that Engwith couldn't necessarily match, and perhaps they didn't want to risk going to the Living Lands at any point in time, and therefore provoke them into war or something like that. At least that's my guess. However, the question might come up with, okay, well, when that oceanic storm came in and separated the main continent of Yezuha from Living Lands, where they would arguably have a lot less people, why didn't the Ingwithans go there then? And there is an answer to that question, but it is not part of today's episode. That is part of spoilers, and I did not give a spoiler warning for that. And that is everything to talk about on the History of the Living Lands book series and everything we want to mention there. And I really actually like this. Now, granted, later on in Avowed, you're talking with Yatsley, one of your companions, and she kind of half confirms this theory by giving her own theory that kind of matches along with it, that the Godless people are in fact Yezuhans. And that's who they were, that's why they were there in the Living Lands, and that is their origin. There's a lot about Yezuha that is also very interesting that ties with the Godless. The Yezuhans, for example, they don't have gods, they only have God. They have a singular god that they worship. They're monotheistic in their culture. And so what's going on over there? Because the 11 gods of the Eoran pantheon are pretty well established within this world as actually existing, considering you can actually engage with them, especially in the Pillars of Eternity games. You can overhear them in Avowed, and you can actually interact with one directly, I believe. So what's going on there? What's their society like? What kind of ancient knowledge do they have, considering how long they've been in the world, et cetera, et cetera, right? So there's a lot of interesting questions, but there seems to be this direct connection. So that's everything we have to talk about today. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. Let's close out the episode and whatnot.
Is an oath worth the weight of a crown?
Thanks everyone for listening. I hope you really enjoyed today's episode. If you'd like to email me to point out any clarifications or ask a question or add on to the lore, I would love to hear from you. Even if you just want to chat about video games, I would love to hear from you. You can reach me at worldofeora@gmail.com. If you want to follow me on Twitter to get any updates about the show or what's going on, you can do so at World of Eora. If you want to support the show in any way, there are a couple things you can do. If you'd like to support the show directly, you can go to ko-fi/World of Eora to directly, or I guess not directly, financially support, the show. You can do so there, ko-fi.com/World of Eora. I don't expect anyone to do that. I'll do this show for free. That's just there for those who like to support the things that they listen to. If you want to support the show, but you don't want to do so in that way, please consider leaving a rating and a review on Apple/iTunes, or iTunes. Who even knows what iTunes is anymore? Because they just call it iMusic now, don't they? I don't know. I don't have an Apple. Sorry if I lost listeners by saying that. Or other thing you can do is if you're on Spotify, leave a comment. Somehow engage with the show and the algorithm, and it helps other people see the show as well. But if you want to help out the show, that's ways to do that. Or, as I mentioned earlier, send me an email. I find that just communicating and having chats with people, best thing to do. And it's literally kept this show alive at certain points. So thanks to everyone who has done that. As for what I've been playing lately, I have been playing Clair Obscur Expedition 33. I'm about 12 hours into the game right now, and my goodness, listen, I say this as a person who has literally been doing a Pillars of Eternity / Avowed podcast for years, and Avowed came out this year, and I love Avowed. I do, 100%. And Clair Obscur Expedition 33 is so far my game of the year for 2025. I do not say that lightly. Given the context of what this podcast topic is about and what I've been doing for years, and that game came out this year. But yeah, Expedition 33 is so far my game of the year. Now, granted, that's my game of the year. Everyone's going to have different tastes, but it is just a wow game for me. And it harkens back to some games I played a lot in my youth. Final Fantasy VII, the original Final Fantasy VII, was a very important game in my gaming history when I was a kid. And so this game doesn't run entirely like that, but this will very JRPG and turn-based combat, epic story, a lot of mystery and grandeur, etc., etc. And it's very well written, very well performed. The music takes big swings, and I think it lands really well. Clair Obscur Expedition 33 is a wonderful game. It is a masterpiece. I hope it wins Game of the Year in a lot of different, awards shows or programs, or at the very least is a nominee for it, because it is very well done. And I think, especially since it's on Game Pass, everyone should be giving it a shot at the very least. And if you're turned off by turn-based games, I still recommend doing it. It does have a dodge parry system. No, it's not a Souls-like for those who don't like Souls-like, but it can be a little tough at times. I've turned it down to story mode just to get through certain bosses every now and then, but also because I really, really need to know what happens. For those who have been playing it, I very recently finished Act 1, and if you've beaten Act 1, then you know the exact reaction I had, because it's probably the same reaction you had. I lost my mind. I didn't expect that. What a twist. What a ballsy move by the developers. It was great. They pulled it off in a very, very good way, actually, I think. So I'm not going to say anything because I don't want to spoil it. It's a really cool end to the Act 1. So go ahead and check it out if you're even a little bit intrigued. But yeah, JRPG, big story, very big on story, so you're not going to want to skip a lot of cutscenes, and it really focuses in on the combat for the gameplay loop, which I think is very engaging, and they craft each individual character that you control in their own unique way. Each person approaches combat in their own unique way. One person, they stack this number on enemies by applying this particular magic on them, and then they can break the magic with another ability that gives bonus to damage, but so you're trying to balance that kind of a thing. Other people build up power through other means. Other people, you want to kind of rotate through different elemental types, or not elemental, but whatever. There's a lot to it. It's not overly complicated, but it's not just basic and simple through the entirety either. So I think it's a very good game. Again, very well performed. The voice actors and the motion capture have done very well, and not just for the human characters, but for, I would say, non-human characters as well that are in there. They did a great job of being non-human but still relatable in some way, shape, or form. And I love the lore of this world. I love the story and where it's going. And I need to know what the hell is happening, who the paintress is, or what's her deal, why this is all going on. I am consumed by this game. And normally I would just run bull rush straight to the end to get those answers, but I'm getting such a reward from sidestepping to just checking out other areas, and not just for combat purposes or for building a good weapon arsenal. I'm getting like story exposition. I'm getting world exposition. I am getting rewarded in every possible way for looking into side stuff. So I'm going to be playing this game for a while. Like, honestly, I think it's going to be all of May. I'm going to be playing this game. I'll probably be done somewhere in June just for how much time I have to play games, but I don't care. Like, I'm enjoying it. So sorry to go on a long rant for that. Hopefully I convinced at least one person to give it a shot because it's real good. But that's everything for today's episode. Thanks everyone for listening to listen to me, I guess, talk about the Godless, the history of the Living Lands, and its connection to a country of Yezuha, which has ties to ancient Eora lore and history, especially as it ties to the Engwithin and the ancient Huana, and what their role and relationship might be. I know I left a couple little like cliffhangers in terms of lore of like who some of them are, but that didn't have anything to do with what we were talking about today, so you can listen to other episodes or play the games or listen to a future episode maybe where I dive in on that stuff. If you want to, email me that say, hey, I wish you would have said this, let me know, and then I'll know to do that in the future. But for now, that's it. Thanks everyone for listening to today's episode. I've been your host, Eric, aka Gingerino, and I'll see you guys next time.